Welcome back to the Wizarding World Legacy Podcast. I'm your host, Eric.
And I'm Jasmine.
And today we're going to be picking up where we left off with our list of missing characters from the film adaptation of the Harry Potter series. We ended last episode with a clue about this character. He was the only Hogwarts headmaster to ever cancel a season of Quidditch. Hopefully you guys have left some comments down below. I won't know yet because we're filming this before the other one even goes live.
We're ahead of the game.
We're trying to be. So this character is Phineas Nigellus Black. If you're somebody who's been playing the Hogwarts Legacy game.
And I hope you are.
Absolutely. You will have already met this character. But even if you're not, you will have seen him in both the movies and the books. He's elaborated more on in the books, but he is seen in the movies when Dumbledore tells him to check on his portrait at Grimmauld Place. He was a former headmaster, so he has a portrait in the headmaster's office, but he also has one in Grimmauld Place, as well as at the Ministry of Magic.
Very, very functional portrait placing.
Yes, it is very functional. So the Ministry of Magic is the one that he sends... Oh, I said Grimmauld Place earlier. He sends him to the Ministry of Magic to check on Arthur, who was on guard duty at the Department of Mysteries when they were trying to secure the prophecy about Harry and Voldemort. So he died in 1925. He left his ancestral home of Grimmauld Place to his descendants, and he ended up doing some traveling after he died.
Which not many of us get to see.
Yeah, that's right.
So, claim to fame.
That's right. And that was in Hermione's bag with the undetectable extension charm. So his portrait was placed in there from Grimmauld Place after they tried to apparate there, and Yaxley grabbed hold of Ron and got splinched and all that fun stuff.
So it was placed in the bag before the
Correct.
series of apparitions that took place. When they first got there and sort of recognized who he was, they knew that there would be the portrait in the headmaster's office. Snape was the headmaster.
That's right.
Super duper risky. So they took that and just put it in a bag.
I don't know that his absence in terms of like any further elaboration on him was that important to the movies. I do think that the taking of his portrait down from Grimmauld Place and bringing it with them certainly could have served some story details. It did serve story details in the actual books.
Yeah.
I think it would have been interesting to have kept that.
Yes.
Because it kind of further illustrates that they don't trust Snape and kind of gives you a little bit better understanding of just like how forward-thinking Hermione is. Like she really thought, oh my god, he's here, Snape's there, we need to take him down, put him in my bag so he can't tell anyone anything. And they do use him for information later in the stories, which we never see in the movies. Right.
Yeah. I think that he's one of those characters that I would have liked to see. With the list of 40, there are some characters where I genuinely don't care because
over 40 for ours.
Over 40 for ours. But those characters that I really just don't care about, and I don't think they would have added to the story, I think Phineas would have added.
He could have, definitely. Yeah, some of the other ones, as you guys will hear, were just left out, but it wasn't really consequential.
Right.
And that may kind of include the next one, except for the fact that it is part of a bigger plot point, which shouldn't have been left out.
Agreed.
So the next character is Carcus.
Also known as the Gurg of the Giants.
Yes, so he was the leader of the Giants that Madame Maxine and Aglede go to visit. I thought that part was important because it kind of illustrated that Madame Maxine was part giant. Yep. It was kind of like her admission without having to admit that she was part giant.
Right.
Because she doesn't ever acknowledge that she is part giant.
No, she does not formally.
Yeah. So Hagrid and Madame Maxime go there. They give him gifts. One of them was the ever-burning...
torch,
which was like a tree limb or something like that. Mm-hmm. And Dumbledore had enchanted it to burn eternally, which is actually apparently a really difficult feat of magic.
Right. Here's a question. When Dumbledore died, does that go out?
I don't know. That would be a great question for somebody to submit to J.K. Rowling and get her to answer.
Excuse me, Joanne
Rowling.
Get back to us on that one. Thank you.
So, we should submit that to her on Twitter and see if we can get a response.
Yes.
But yeah, so they gave him some gifts, a goblin helmet that was indestructible, all these other fun fun things. But unfortunately, he was notorious for inspiring infighting amongst the giants and killing of their own kind. And he ended up reaping what he sowed because another giant by the name of
I forget.
Golgamath
Oh, yes, Gulgamath.
ends up killing him. And he didn't really want to have anything to do with Hagrid and Madame Maxine and Dumbledore. Really didn't have any respect for Dumbledore like Carcass had.
Right.
So they end up fighting with the Death Eaters. So that whole trip was essentially a waste.
More or less, yes.
Yeah.
I think leaving that out of the movies like they did, they mention it in the movies, but I think
Went
when
to
it's
parley with the giants.
parlay, I think when it's included in the books, it's one of the best demonstrations of Dumbledore's respect for other cultures. When
Yeah.
Dumbledore sends Hagrid and Madame Maxine off, he discusses how they are to make this introduction. They arrive with a gift, they give it to him on the first day, and then they leave.
And
They
they back
ask
off.
for nothing else and give them time. And they show up with another gift. And it really demonstrated that not only did Dumbledore understand other cultures, but respected them and wanted to ensure that his sort of people were doing the same.
He didn't just go in there, guns ablazing or wands ablazing, as it were.
Right.
And say, listen, you're going to fight for us or we're going to make you wish you had fought for us.
Right, exactly.
And some of the giants kind of responded how you would want them to respond, and obviously Golgamath did not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not my favorite dude.
So it was a bummer it was excluded. Did it make a major impact on the storyline? No, it just would have been a really good thing to see, especially if they had done a great job on the animation.
Right. And so that is something that I'm hoping is
Now the technology has
included
come so far, yeah.
in the TV show.
Yeah. The next one is Professor Cuthbert Binns. He is notably the only ghost professor
Absolutely.
on the entire staff. He wasn't always a ghost professor, of course. He taught a history of magic way back in the day, and way back in the 1800s. And he fell asleep at his chair by the fire in the staff room one day and woke up and resumed teaching class. Except he woke up dead. So
Which is awkward.
Kind of just left his body behind. They never really explain what they did with the body. Like, the ghost is there, kind of leaves his body behind, doesn't even know he's a ghost.
How do you become a ghost?
So you have to die and choose to stay behind based on the fact that you have unfinished business. So I think it was probably a subconscious choice that he must have made where he said, I have class to teach tomorrow. So I got to make sure I'm there for it. And it's weird because it does seem inconsistent with how we hear it explained for like Nearly Headless Nick, because he talks about kind of in detail to Harry how choosing to be a ghost is not something I would wish upon anyone, Harry.
Right.
And Harry wants hope about Sirius potentially being able to see him again or come back, or even his parents. And
Right.
he said, being a ghost is not the same as coming back, and it's not something that most wizards would choose.
Right. It's just, generally speaking, not a vibe.
Yeah, but he explains it in a bit more detail,
Right.
which makes it seem like it is an active choice.
Right. And I mean,
And Moaning Myrtle
Moaning Myrtle.
she kind of makes it seem like it was an active choice because she wanted to haunt Oliver Hornby
Exactly.
for making fun of my glasses.
Yeah. So Moaning Myrtle had business.
Yep.
The Bloody Baron, that was an active choice.
Yep, and he even chose to bear chains of sort of chains of guilt and remorse in his afterlife. And then Rowena Ravenclaw's ghost.
Yep.
She chose to stay behind because I think she had wanted to destroy. I think the reason she chose to stay behind, if I remember correctly, is her desire to destroy the diadem, because she had actually stolen it from her mother.
Right.
And when the Bloody Baron had pursued her and she refused to come back, that's what she was killed. And she hadn't finished doing what she wanted to do, which was kind of like go out on her own, come out from under the shadow of her mother,
right,
and even destroy the diadem. So
yeah,
I think his exclusion was important because he's actually the one who went on to explain the Chamber of Secrets plot,
right?
Not Minerva. And while they found a reasonable way around that, I think excluding the only Hogwarts ghost professor or the only Hogwarts professor that is a ghost, and the person who directly impacts the plot
Right.
by explaining about the, Chamber of Secrets, which he should have been able to find. Like, the castle has been searched many times and has never been found. You're a ghost, dude. Like, you don't need to know the password. Just go through the walls.
Right.
Presumably, he could. Maybe I'm wrong.
Unless there's magic that prevents ghosts from getting in.
Which there could be. I mean, that's certainly something Salazar could have done, but
We're
it's
definitely
never,
gonna.
yeah, it's never explained.
Fair.
That's another question we can ask.
Yep,
Take
another
care.
one. Just gonna note that.
So yeah, Professor Cuthbert Binns. Do you think it was?
So for me, there are characters that feel as though they would have been easy to include. You don't have to do a ton of character development for him. You can just have a singular history of magic class, have him teach it, and have Hermione ask.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he's somebody that they actually casted a ghost actor for.
Right.
I know we see the Fat Friar, we see the Bloody Baron, we see Rowena Ravenclaw, we see Nero Hideous Nick,
Moaning Myrtle.
And I think there's a couple other ghosts that we see. I don't know that he's one that ever shows up and is just not identified.
Right.
But you had enough of them there, and you kind of had an idea of how you wanted to film them and represent them on screen.
Right.
And they looked good.
Yeah.
It would have been easy to do.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it was a big exclusion. I don't know that everybody feels that way, though.
Hope to see him in the TV show.
For sure. Marietta Edgecombe.
My least favorite sneak.
Yes. Glad you used that word. So Marietta Edgecombe was a Ravenclaw. She was the best friend of Cho Chang. Cho had brought her along to the Hogshead for the first meeting of the DA, Dumbledore's army. And she reluctantly signed up to join Dumbledore's army. And people may remember, if they've read the books, that Hermione had put a jinx on the parchment that they all signed up on. So when you were signing your name to Dumbledore's army, you were making a magically binding contract, which included not speaking about Dumbledore's army to anybody who wasn't in it, for risk of giving away its formation.
Right.
When she told Umbridge,
right,
about the about the club, it ended up resulting in very painful pustules forming on her forehead in the spelling out the word sneak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like for her, it would have been another easy character to include. I
agree. She could have been very easy to include. I want to say she was another one who was actually cast. And I don't know that anybody ever says her name or anything, but she would have been an easy one to include. It would have taken up very little screen time, but it, again, kind of would have added to Hermione's character, because these are like very painful pustules that are on her face that form in the word sneak, and kind of illustrate Hermione's got kind of a dark side.
A little bit of a dark side and buckets of forethought.
Yeah, there's another scene that we'll talk about another time with that exact sort of situation with Hermione, where she does something and you're like, damn, okay. All right, don't mess with Hermione.
Okay.
But no, it shows her magical prowess at a fairly young age and how she is very, very gifted, even with curses and hexes and jinxes that they wouldn't have been taught.
Right. And I also think that it unfairly damages Cho's character.
In the movies, for sure. Yeah, the wrong person gets the blame.
Right.
And I'm not down with it.
Right. And then there's just this awkward discord between Cho and Harry. And there's other reasons for awkward discord between them that are entirely left out.
Totally. 100%. We'll move on to another another Hogwarts student who is a Hufflepuff, not a Ravenclaw, which is Zachariah Smith. Remind me what's important about him.
Zachariah Smith also attends the DA meeting.
Yep.
But he is extremely outspoken against it. He's...
And in particular against Harry.
Against Harry overall, yeah. He suggests that Harry caused Cedric Diggory's death.
Yeah. Regardless of whether or not he killed him, he basically says or implies that Harry's responsible when they're at the Hog's Head.
Exactly. And while he himself doesn't necessarily play a major role
Mm-hmm.
in the events that happened during Harry's time at Hogwarts. He is the direct descendant of Helga Hufflepuff, Hepzibah Smith.
So he's a descendant of Hepzibah Smith, who
And-
is a descendant of Helga Hufflepuff.
So he is a
Yeah, in some way, he's a descendant of Helga Hufflepuff.
Gotcha.
So I think that's important too, because if you sort of read into his character, he's really described as selfish, disloyal, and loyalty is a huge Hufflepuff quality, and cowardly. So he's kind of somebody who really doesn't fit in any house. I mean, if you're going to look at just the negative qualities of Slytherins, you could say maybe he gets thrown into Slytherin, but I wouldn't let him in. I'd kick him out.
Eric, is it possible that you may be a Slytherin?
It's possible.
Huh.
It's definitely possible.
Interesting.
But disloyalty is not really, well, unless it gains you favor, it's not really something that's tolerated amongst Slytherins either, because they're loyal to each other.
Loyalty.
And Slytherins aren't described necessarily as cowardly, but they're not going to do something brave unless it benefits them.
Right.
So that's where, the selfishness could tentatively lump him in with Slytherins. I think it's strictly because he's a descendant of Hufflepuff that he got sorted into that house. I don't think he would have otherwise been sorted there.
Yeah. I mean, he does end up participating in Dumbledore's army,
But very reluctantly and constantly being a dick to Harry.
Right. So
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think, maybe he could have been like Gryffindor? Because I definitely wouldn't have wanted him in
But he's considered
Hufflepuff.
cowardly and unloyal. Those are two sort of
So then what
is
is he?
Well, he is a Hufflepuff, but I think the only reason he really got sorted there was because of his
I mean,
lineage.
although it's not accurate, people do tend to consider Hufflepuff the house that everyone else is just thrown into.
Just kind of takes it.
So
No, there is something in the Hufflepuff motto. I forget the exact verbiage, but that basically says we'll take the rest.
right.
And people take that as we'll take the cast outs and like the last person picked for dodgeball kind of people. That's not what it means. It's just like if you
Yeah, I
if you
didn't
don't,
say that.
Well, no, that's how people represent it though. And if you look at some of the famous Hufflepuffs throughout history, a lot of them are very accomplished and very skilled wizards or witches. And so they're obviously not the castaways. They're just the ones whose qualities aligned most with Helga's.
Right. Agreed.
So, it's also notable that he was a chaser for the Hufflepuff team. So, being that we talked about him, I'm going to skip a couple on my list and go to Hepzibah Smith. We will go back to the other two. But Hepzibah Smith, I think, was a pretty important exclusion.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a lot of exclusions in the books that she would have been in that were pretty important. So she, again, was a descendant of Helga Hufflepuff.
Yep.
You're a Hufflepuff, so I'll let you talk about her.
Yeah, I am a Hufflepuff through and through, and I do believe that I align with the qualities of Hufflepuff. I wasn't just tossed in there, so
I'd agree with that.
for the record. Anyway,
But also took the official sorting quiz.
also did take the official sorting quiz multiple times with multiple email addresses because that's what it takes. But I've absolutely confirmed that I'm a Hufflepuff.
You can actually retake it now with your same account. So if you have a Wizarding World account, you can actually retake the quiz every year if you want to.
Really?
Yeah. I've done it multiple times because I'm like, am I definitely a Slytherin? Obviously. But
Yeah,
yes.
I don't know how you doubt that, but
Well, it's not that I doubt it. I just want to see.
you just want confirmation.
I want to test the test.
No, that's totally fair. You've absolutely demonstrated that the test is valid.
Yeah. So Hepzibah Smith. I'm sorry.
Hepzibah. So she is, like we said, descendant of Helga Hufflepuff. And so as a descendant, she has the gold cup that was Helga's. And so she becomes sort of almost friends with a very young, recently graduated Tom Riddle.
Correct.
Who is currently working at Borgin and Burke's, which most of the time people see as very odd for someone who is so accomplished in their school years to go work for a creepy shop.
Yeah. Everyone thought it was very, very odd that somebody who was destined for greatness went and worked for Borgin and Burke's, which is basically just a run-of-the-mill wizard retail store, basically, but that specialized in rare or dark objects.
And is a little bit creepy.
Very creepy. Do you know why he ended up being put in touch with her, specifically?
Didn't they send him to get something from her?
So Caractacus Burke who was the Burke from Borgin and Burkes, who was kind of the one who was running the show sales-wise at the time and sort of organizing the business at the time, which is interesting because it really seems like Borgin is the one who ends up during Harry Potter's time. We don't even see Burke during the movies at all, and he's really not mentioned much in the books at all, except for in this sort of flashback. So Caractacus Burke already had a relationship with Hepzibah Smith because she was a notable collector of magical antiquities.
Right.
So she was a collector of rare and powerful objects and liked to flout her ownership of those things, which is kind of what gets her in a pickle with young Tom.
A little bit.
Yeah.
So when Tom is going to her place to sort of collect some of these things that she is flouting, she discloses to him that she has acquired Slytherin's locket, which was sold to Burke by Voldemort's mother. So there's a little bit of, it almost feels like it should have been passed down to Tom.
It definitely should have been, and I think would have been,
Right.
but it wasn't because Merope was desperate for money.
Right.
She was pregnant with Tom Riddle, a.k.a. Voldemort.
Spoiler alert.
Because Tom Riddle Sr. had left her after she lifted the
Love potion.
Love potion spell, whatever you want to call it. It was a potion, but like the effects of it.
Right.
And she was going to be giving birth and had nothing. I mean, her father was in jail. Her brother was in jail. He would eventually come back to the home. But she had no means. And so this was the one thing of value she had. And she sold it for pretty much nothing.
I was going to say, I don't think she even realized how valuable it was.
Yeah, I don't think she realized how valuable it was. I don't know that she knew it was Slytherin's locket.
Right.
She knew it was valuable. She knew it was a family heirloom, but she didn't know how valuable. And she wasn't really in a position to negotiate.
Right. So she got very little money for it, but at the end of the day, it ended up with Hepzibah.
Who bought it from Burke.
And Tom Riddle essentially goes back a few days after sort of a formal work visit and facilitates Hepzibah's demise, blaming it on her house elf, Hokey, right?
Yes.
Hokey.
Yep.
So he manipulates Hokey, I believe, convinces her Imperious Curse.
So I don't even think that he actually Imperious cursed her. He actually took Hokey and modified her memories.
Oh, right.
So he basically made it so that Hokey admitted to the ministry officials that she had killed Hepzibah by
poisoning her like evening tea or something.
Her evening cocoa, yeah.
Yes.
So because she just admitted it, the ministry never really launched a formal investigation. And I think if they had, and you had people within like the unspeakables and stuff like that really get into it, they probably would have seen that the memory had been modified, just like with Slughorn.
Exactly. So rough there, but overall, that is how Voldemort or Tom Riddle ends up with both Helga Hufflepuff's cup and Salazar Slytherin's locket.
That's right. So we're going to move on to a couple other characters. You could classify them as near human.
Okay, Umbridge.
Or you could just say that they're magical creatures. But these two are centaurs. The first one is Bane, the centaur.
Right.
We meet him in book 1, and he does eventually come back in the last book. But we meet him during Harry's first trip into the Forbidden Forest. He actually defends Harry during his encounter with Voldemort
/ Quirrell.
Yeah, exactly. And he chastises Firenze for wanting to be involved in human affairs after reading the signs of the heavens.
Because in that moment, Firenze is talking to Hagrid, right?
In that moment, Firenze is the one who has Harry on his back.
Okay.
And he's like, "You're going to let him take you around like a common mule." So
okay.
I'm doing that voice because that's how Jim Dale does it.
Yes.
Jim Dale, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that is Jim Dale's portrayal of really all centaurs.
Yeah, I think all centaurs, because of their involvement in sort of the mystical arts, I think he views them as being Eastern, particularly sort of more aligned with like Indian culture and things like that. So that is kind of the accent he portrays with the centaurs. But yeah, so Bane the Centaur chastises Frenzy for this, but then he does involve himself in the affairs of human beings because he ends up joining the Battle of Hogwarts.
Right.
We also see him fire a warning shot at Umbridge when she calls them filthy half-breeds.
Filthy half-breeds?
So he's mentioned in the movies, I think just in the... No, he's mentioned in the movies in the first and fifth one, but we don't see any of their involvement in the Battle of Hogwarts, and we don't see his interaction with Frenzy.
No, we don't. We don't really get any of the...
Actually, no, we don't see him in the first movie.
We don't.
No.
We don't get any of the Centaur's opinions of humans and the non-intermingling. They kind of seem like willing participants most of the time.
In the movies, they definitely do. And it's really important, sort of that exchange that happens between them, because one of the Centaurs ends up becoming Frenzy.
Frenzy ends up becoming a Hogwarts professor.
Yeah, divination professor after Trelawney's kicked out. So that whole exchange is important, and that whole letting Harry ride on his back like a common mule ends up kind of getting him kicked out of the herd.
Right. He's ostracized.
Yeah. So I think that was important to build your understanding of the Centaur culture and those characters.
Right.
Did their exclusion really change the movies? No, but we would have seen him teaching class and stuff, which would have been cool. But it didn't change the movies. Overall, it didn't change the main plot.
Right. I think I'd like to have seen Frenzy more, but Bane and Ronan.
Yeah, so Ronan's the next one. He is in book 1 and book 5. We meet him during the detention in the Forbidden Forest as well. Just like Bane, he was distrustful of humans, but he did protect Harry and Hermione from the others in the 5th one, because they actually, unlike in the movies, the kids are threatened, and Dolores doesn't go, and like protect them. He actually calls them foals and says, "We do not harm foals," and implies that because they're kids,
right,
they're not really meant to be treated the same way as if an adult wizard came into the forest. So he kind of protects them. Again, important, because while he's distrustful of humans, there's a code.
Right.
Like a code of ethics that they follow, and he's not willing to break that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, we see him at the Battle of Hogwarts. He actually breaks through the ranks of Death Eaters with the other Centaurs and joins the group of wizards in the Great Hall. I think I want to say this is when they're gathering their dead, but I might be wrong on that. But that's when we see him in the books. Moving away from magical creatures, although we will have some more at the end. Barty Crouch Jr.'s mother.
It's a mouthful.
It is. So we don't actually see her in the books so much as hear a recollection about her.
Yeah.
And
There's a story with her in it.
Right. And you could argue that it's completely an exposition dump, and that's the only reason we get to meet her at all.
Right.
But I do think it was kind of an important exposition dump.
Very important.
Very important, yeah. And there's definitely ways you could have done it in the movie where you are showing instead of telling. Even if you showed and did a little bit of narration over it, like you could hear Barty Crouch Jr. telling what's happening while you're seeing it on screen if you felt that was necessary. Some movies and some shows will do that, where you'll hear the narration of what's happening. But even then, I don't think you had to. I think you could have just kind of like shown what was happening.
Yeah.
And you could have had Barty Crouch Sr. and his mother talking so that you know who she is to Barty Crouch Jr. But yeah. So let's talk about what she does.
So would she be Mrs. Crouch Sr.?
No. So Barty Crouch Sr. is Barty Crouch Sr. because his son's name is Barty Crouch.
Yeah, but
her name's not Barty.
But if you say Mrs. Crouch, couldn't she technically, wouldn't that be confusing?
No.
Mrs. Crouch Jr. versus Mrs. Crouch Sr.?
No, there is no junior or senior.
Okay. How do you tell that she's not married to her son? That's
weird. Why would you say that?
I'm just...
Well, Barty Crouch Jr. isn't married, number one.
Well, that's true.
Number two, historically, women have not done senior and junior. That's not a thing.
Well, that's fair.
And I guess my third point would be that we never get a first name, so we just call her Mrs. Crouch, or Barty Crouch Jr.'s mom.
All right, fair enough. Well, so when Barty Crouch Jr. goes to Azkaban after viciously torturing Neville's parents. Really, really sad. So he goes to Azkaban. Falls really, really ill, and he is on his sort of deathbed. And
No, he doesn't.
well, that's the story. Is it not?
No.
Does she get sick, and so she gets to see him because she's dying?
Yes. So what happens is he's imprisoned at Azkaban, as you said, but his mother gets deathly ill, and she is going to die. Like, she's terminal, and they know she's going to die. Because of Barty Crouch Sr.'s rank within the Ministry, she uses his rank and his authority to gain a deathbed visit with her son, and is brought in sort of as like a dying wish. And so she's able to visit, but then she has Polyjuice Potion with her. She takes the Polyjuice Potion, which she adds her son's, hair or whatever to, while she's visiting, trades places with him because she's going to die anyways.
Right.
She convinced her husband, I believe while at the jail, to let her do this. Switches places with him. She stays behind. I don't know if he took some Polyjuice Potion and came out as her. I believe he did.
Yes.
And then she ends up dying in jail. And they never got to retrieve the body, because if they did retrieve the body, they would have had to admit to what they had done. And he would have, Barty Crouch Sr. would have been destroyed for that. But no, she uses his stature within the Ministry.
I knew that,
to
but
gain herself a deathbed visit.
But I thought that he was sick.
Nope.
And that's why they got to go see him. No. Because if they were convinced that she was going to die.
So she got to see him to say her goodbyes before she died. That was the premise of the visit, which wasn't something they normally allowed.
Right. It was absolutely because of his position.
Yeah.
But interesting.
Yeah, so he got snuck out, but he got snuck out under the Imperious Curse.
Right.
Under the Imperious Curse. And his father made him basically live under the Imperious Curse, like, all the time.
Right.
Which is part of why he is so stressed and uptight all the time. He's constantly worried about making sure, like, checking in on him and making sure he's still, like, under his control and that nobody's going to find out.
Right.
Winky is supposed to watch over him, which we'll talk. Actually, we already talked about Winky.
We talked about Winky.
Yeah, so it's very stressful, and I feel like that's another reason why leaving Winky out and other characters out was a negative, is because you miss some of these things.
Absolutely.
So we're going to move on. We got a lot to get through. Miriam Strout.
So she's the caretaker in the Janice Thicky ward.
Correct.
So in the Janice Thicky ward is essentially the long-term psych ward, more or less.
Well, psych or just like long-term care unit.
Got you.
People who just aren't going to get better from their magical maladies, whatever they are, whether they're brain altering or whether they're physically altering or whatever. If they're in a state where they can't care for themselves and they're not going to get better, but they will need care long-term.
Huh. I guess we haven't been given a whole lot of examples of people with physical ailments.
That's true. Most of the people
in the Janice Thicky ward.
Yeah, people who are unable to care for themselves would usually have some sort of mind-altering spell on them or hex or whatever.
Which is why I think of it as a semi-psych ward at St. Mungo's Hospital.
Yeah.
So essentially she is the caretaker.
She's one of their healers. Notably, she was very bad at herbology, which plays an important role later when, when another person.
What's his name?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Another person on that ward ends up getting killed because she was so bad at her.
So it's someone.
Plants. Hold on, I'm gonna find him on the list. Is that him? No.
So someone ends up in St. Mungo's in the Janice Thicky ward.
Here we go. I got him right here.
Okay.
Broderick Bode. So he was an unspeakable for the Ministry of Magic at the Department of Mysteries. He was forced to try to... He was an unspeakable... I already said that, unspeakable. Yeah. He was forced to try to retrieve the prophecy. And when he tried to do so, by Lucius, when he tried to do so, he thought he was a teapot afterwards because the magical defenses went off and he couldn't speak anymore. So he was on that ward because they thought he would never recover. He would just sit there kind of in a daze most of the time, or he would mumble, but he wouldn't really do anything. And he had received a Christmas present that was a plant, and she thought it was something harmless. She gave it to him to tend to. When he started getting better, he wasn't quite talking yet, but he started to show signs he was getting better, and he was physically more active. And it ended up being a cutting of
Venomous. Nah,
no,
it's not venomous tentacula.
devil's snare.
Devil's snare.
And when he touched it to try to care for it, it ended up spurring out and grabbing him by the throat and strangulating him to death. So she should have been a better
Herbology student.
Yes, she really should have paid attention. I don't think her exclusion as a character was majorly impactful, except for the fact that was part of a bigger exclusion, which was of all the things that occurred on the Genesiki ward.
I mean, St. Mungo's is basically excluded.
It is literally completely excluded. We see nothing of it.
Right. So I think that plays a big part of a lot of different storylines.
Yes. Muggle Prime Minister, this is a nice quick one. He was left out. The importance of that is it draws in the sort of cooperation or collaboration of the magical and non-magical world between the Minister of Magic and the Muggle Prime Minister. The Muggle Prime Minister knows about the magical world. He's the only Muggle who's really outright told about it. And there's a partnership that goes on every time there's a handover of power. And we see Fudge leaving power, Scrimgeour coming into power, and Fudge makes the handoff to the Prime Minister.
Right.
And I think that was an important aspect of it, because it kind of drew in the Muggle and magical world and showed the importance of their cooperation during this really, really, really dire time.
Yeah.
With the Death Eaters coming to power.
Definitely. And I think it sort of demonstrates the impact that this wizarding war had on Muggles. I think a lot of the times in the movies, they're sort of forgotten. We really just focus on the impact it had on wizards.
Yeah.
I don't think it didn't feel appropriate for the movies, but I do hope it feels appropriate for the show.
Yeah. I think if you're doing a direct retelling and you have to make cuts somewhere, that's probably not the place to make a cut.
Agreed.
I think it can fit in pretty easily. Getting on to our next character, Regulus Black. We all know who R.A.B.
There is.
And so we do hear about him. We get some information about him, but it is elaborated on much more in the books.
Right.
Because we talk about, and this actually I think was a really important exclusion because it gives you character development for Creature.
Absolutely.
Kind of let you know why he is what he is.
A lot of character development. Some of the only character development we get for Creature.
Yeah, but that character development is kind of what makes him start responding appropriately to Harry.
Right. Absolutely. So Regulus Arcturus Black is Sirius's younger brother. He is very involved in sort of the pureblood mania, very much a Death Eater.
He was a Slytherin.
Yep. Fit sort of the standard Black presence.
Mm-hmm.
But after a while, sort of switched sides entirely.
Yeah, he was kind of just, I guess, self-disillusioned with the whole Death Eater premise and with what Voldemort specifically was doing. And it wasn't that he was necessarily a good guy. It just was that Voldemort was such a bad guy that he's like, I literally can't. I can't be a part of this, and I need to do something from the inside to stop him.
Right.
So we know that he takes the locket with the intention of destroying it. We know that he learns about the locket in the books. We don't know how he knew about the locket in the movies because it's never explained. And this is the character development that I think was an important exclusion.
That's a very good point.
We know he takes the locket because Creature was lent to Voldemort in order to test the potion and test the whole basically hiding of the Horcrux. And Creature then gives that information to Regulus because even if he swore to Voldemort that he wouldn't, there is no magic that can supersede his need to do what his master tells him to do. Mm-hmm. So even if he promised on point of death not to tell Regulus to Voldemort, it wouldn't matter. He has to tell Regulus.
Right.
And I don't even think he would have been able to make the promise, which I don't know that Voldemort would have understood anyways. So he actually was the one who drank the potion the first time. He comes back. He's in a really terrible state. Regulus kind of nursed him back to health, which
Yeah, he
created
came back because Regulus told him he
come
had
back.
to come back.
Yeah, because Voldemort just left him there.
Voldemort intended for him to die there.
Right. And Harry even asked him, how did you escape the Inferi? And he said, my master told me to come home. And he said, right, I get that. But how did you escape the Inferi? And Creature just goes, my master told me to come home. I don't know what you're not getting here, but he told me to come back. I came back. That's how,
right.
how
Even
self
though
magic works.
Exactly. So I was going to die, but like my master was like, come home.
And so just, I
That's
came
how
back.
it happened.
So I thought that was important. Again, it really
Very much so.
gives you more of the foundation of elf magic
Mhm.
and how that bond works. It gives you the entirety of character development for Creature, and it gives you an understanding of how the hell Regulus even knew about the locket. Like, he wouldn't have known.
Right.
Nobody was told. Even if you were in the inner circle about these, no one was told.
Right.
Otherwise, Lucius wouldn't have given the diary to Ginny.
Right.
Anyway, I thought that was an important exclusion. So even though he wasn't excluded entirely, the biggest portions of his story were. And
Yeah.
he's one of the unsung heroes.
Absolutely. Well, I struggle with it because he is partially responsible for Sirius's death, and I'll
Yep.
never fully forgive him for that one. However, he does work on his recovery arc a lot.
Yeah, he does. Mr. Borgin. We'll plow right through this because most of us know who Borgin and Burke are.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Borgin was the co-owner of Borgin and Burke's dark artifacts shop in Nocturne Alley. He's the one who we mostly hear about during Harry Potter's timeline. But prior to that, it would have been Burke mostly. Borgin and Burke's was established in 1863, and Voldemort did work there after graduating from Hogwarts. They're the ones who got the Slytherin locket, ended up selling it to Hepzibah Smith, resulting in her death. That was actually really the thing that resulted in her death, too. It wasn't even the cup, it was the locket.
Right.
Because I think she made a snide comment about Merope, and yeah. I don't think exclusion of Mr. Burke from the
Mr. Borgin.
Mr. Borgin, I'm sorry, from the movies was pivotal. It was annoying though, because if you watch the extended cut or deleted scenes, they did film him.
Right.
So it's really annoying when you've gone through the effort and then you just exclude him. But I don't think it was pivotal.
No.
Though it does, again, play into other parts of the storyline that I think were important. Arthur ends up sending a raid on Lucius's house because Harry hears the exchange between Lucius and Mr. Borgin. That doesn't really get talked about in the movies. Even with the extended cut, it doesn't get talked about in the movies. So not pivotal. Would have been good to see him.
Very much so.
Hestia Jones. This is a pretty small character. She was one of the advanced guards in the
Order of the Phoenix.
Order of the Phoenix. She helped the Dursleys escape. It was one of her jobs.
Yeah, so she and Daedalus Diggle, I think.
Yeah,
Those two were the ones who escorted Vernon, Petunia, and Dudley away from.
Yeah, so they sort of offered the magical protection while they were fleeing. Her exclusion really didn't have an impact, but there was a part in the books where there was an interaction with the Dursleys.
Oh, right.
Just like it really brings to light how other people notice how horrible the Dursleys are to Harry. Like, she's like, oh my God, they treat him terribly. They don't even care.
It was the kind of thing like, oh, don't you want to say goodbye to him?
Yeah, and don't you realize what he's doing for you? Like,
yeah.
We wouldn't be protecting you if it weren't for him, and you don't understand the sacrifice he's making by, it really kind of paints that picture for you.
Right.
Is it pivotal? No. I mean, there's other scenes that were shot, like I don't think you're a waste of space.
Oh, God, that broke me.
Yeah, they shot that, but not in the movie.
Waste of space. There is another scene that was shot around that time frame that was Petunia saying, you didn't just lose a mother that day. You know, I lost a sister all those years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But that felt very disingenuous. Nothing like what would have been said in the books. So I'm glad they didn't include that part.
It felt disingenuous, and it wasn't actually how the scene took place in the movies anyways. So they did it differently for the movies anyways, which is like, why? You have the dialogue written for you.
Right.
Just do it the same way.
Right.
And then they kept it anyways. So it's like really annoying. We're going to get through a couple more of these lower priority characters. Sturgis Podmore was another advanced guard of the Order of the Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
He was tasked with protecting the Department of Ministries. Unfortunately, he was put under the Imperious Curse, forced to attempt a break-in the department, and sentenced to 6 months in Azkaban. Prior to that, he was also tasked with transporting Harry from the Dursleys to Grimmauld Place during that time where he and Mad-Eye Moody and all them came. Nymphadora. Don't call me.
Battle of the Potters or something?
No, it wasn't the...
Battle of the Seven Potters or something?
Was that the... Because he went twice. Yeah, no, that was the Battle of Seven Potters. No. Because he goes from there twice. One of them was the time he was going to get expelled. One of them was the Battle of the Seven Potters. So I don't think this one was the... I'll have to look back.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll get
it
back
might
to
have
you
been
on
that
that.
one. We'll get back to you. The next was their exclusion pivotal?
No.
No, not at all.
Nope.
So that's another one of those not so important characters. Emmeline Vance, again, another Order of the Phoenix member. She was part of the first and second war.
Mm-hmm.
She was a guard for the Prime Minister. I think it wasn't necessarily important, but the relationship maintained between the Prime Minister and the Minister of Magic, that whole exclusion, as we already talked about,
Right.
I think that was kind of important. Leaving that whole dynamic out kind of stunk. Was that character important? No, not specifically.
Not really, no.
We've got another character we wanted to talk about. Yeah, Penelope Clearwater.
Penelope Clearwater.
Penelope. I'll let you talk about her. She's a Ravenclaw.
Yeah, she's a Ravenclaw. She is most notably known for dating and being able to date Percy Weasley, who I personally feel as though is a less than pleasant individual until he redeems himself at the end.
Would have been insufferable.
Yeah, would have been insufferable.
Yeah.
So she is also a prefect of Ravenclaw, just like Percy, and she is also attacked by the basilisk in Chamber of Secrets, which for Percy and for really the whole school sends more of a message of how impactful all of this was. For a while, Percy believed that no prefect could possibly be attacked by this mystery monster, but then he's really, really shaken when his girlfriend is attacked.
And it's important to note she wasn't a pureblood, so it's not like he felt she was going to be safe because she was a pureblood.
Right.
It's just that, she was a prefect. Like, how is she just getting attacked? Her mirror is the one that Hermione is holding in the movies, and we also see her when Crabbe and Goyle, which are actually Harry and Ron, say, "Where's our common room?" And she goes, "Our common room? I'm a Ravenclaw."
Right.
Yeah. So there's a couple times where we would have seen her interacting in major plot points. Is her exclusion pivotal? Not really, but I think it kind of did help to. It would have helped to draw. If you were including Percy more in the storyline, which he was, I should have even added him to the list because he was so minimized. It would have kind of given us more information about him and how scared he was about all this because of the fact that his girlfriend, who was a prefect, was attacked.
Right. So I would have liked to see more of Penelope.
Yeah, I would have too. We'll cover a couple more, and then I think we're going to have to cut it there. And we'll finish off with the third episode of the characters. But I'm going to talk about Wilkie Tycross real quick. Really small role. He was the apparition instructor.
Yes.
His description's pretty interesting. They talk about his hair being like kind of crazy with jets of like silver and white and almost clear pieces of hair, which they thought, and missing chunks, which they thought was from his years of apparition and all that kind of stuff. But he was the ministry appointed instructor for apparition for students who were 17 or turning 17 looking to obtain a license to apparate. He was also skilled in transfiguration and wandless magic, which we didn't learn about at all in the movies. Wandless magic.
That's true. We didn't learn about it at all.
I don't think his exclusion was terribly important, but I do think the exclusion of the apparition classes as a whole was kind of a misstep because we never are shown how they learn to apparate. Like, that's a really dangerous and difficult skill.
Right.
And people get really hurt sometimes trying to apparate.
And we see them get hurt in the movie. We see Ron get splinched in the movie.
We do end up seeing him in the actual movies get splinched, but we don't even learn what splinching is.
Right.
And Hermione just kind of says it. We're supposed to understand what it is because obviously you've read the books.
Obviously.
But a lot of people hadn't. Quick little fun fact. His name stems from twi, which is as in two, and cross, meaning between two places. So twi-cross, somebody who is between two places. Hence apparition. So I do love how J.K. Rowling came up with names and why she used certain names and sort of the etymology. Is that the word for it?
Etymology.
Etymology, thank you.
Yeah.
For the names because they're just so clever.
Absolutely.
So clever.
Reminds me of, who's Professor of Arithmancy? Vector?
Yes.
Professor Vector.
Yeah.
That one, obviously, their last name is Vector.
Yeah.
They obviously teach arithmancy.
Actually, pretty much all the professors had some sort of relation to the class that they taught. It was kind of funny.
Amazing.
I liked it. Professor Tofty. This was another one who was a ministry appointed professor. This was the person who oversaw the OWL exams. Again, not a really important exclusion, although there is one little tidbit where they mentioned the cursed faults. I want to say that was this professor, correct? Yeah, the cursed faults. We don't really learn too much about those, but there was another character, I think that went by the name of Jamie, who years ago had opened the cursed vaults, which released the curse on some of the Hogwarts students, and then the Hogwarts headmaster at the time had to find a way to close them. Dumbledore has an interaction with Professor Tofty, who I guess was spying on Hogwarts students, and he was really pissed because he doesn't like the Ministry of Magic as it is.
Yeah.
So he was pretty upset about that and calls him on that, but he says, Dumbledore, I have the utmost respect for you, but I was sort of forced to because of my job at the ministry, and I was just following suspicious students, not just everyone. Not an important exclusion. Even that tidbit there wasn't that important, but somebody who would be interesting to see if you're including all these different elements.
Yeah.
So we will end it there for this evening. We are going to pick it up with a character who you might say had some chilling knowledge.
Oh my God.
That'll make sense when we pick it up. And who was known for being a bit flavorful in Diagon Alley.
Oh God.
So we'll pick it up there. If you know who I'm alluding to very terribly with my crappy puns,
Super poorly,
please leave a comment below. And we'll pick up next time with this character and hopefully finish our list of excluded characters from the movie adaptation of the Harry Potter franchise.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you got any of his super crappy hints, I look forward to hearing your guesses in the comments.
So do I. Bye.